So far we've gotten used to animating things with very simple motion, so up, down, left, right, scaling, things like that. But sometimes we want to animate things that have very complex assemblies and have different parent-child relationships, which we'll discuss parent-child relationships. But there's definitely much more complex routes to pursue when it comes to getting some of the results that we're looking for. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore parenting, and we're also going to explore some other complex aspects of motion, such as pivot points, which we did, slightly cover pivot points, but we're going to talk about a little bit more. So we're going to jump into a couple of those things, and we're going to apply it to this model here that I made. I just kind of drew this up on the fly. What it was is I drew it in Illustrator, true to our workflow, and then I exported it with layers into After Effects. So here it is, and you can see each layer is one of these little shark fins, right? And then let's see here, we've got this middle hexagon, which is really the hub. So basically the idea is I'm going to have all of these shark fins kind of I'm going to have them kind of pop out as this central thing is shaking back and forth. So it'll be interesting, and it'll unfold while I'm doing it. But the idea being is that these shark fins are going to have to move at the same pace and in the same location as this. And alternately, these shark fins are also going to have to, these little doodads are actually going to have to pop out in a manner that is not really true to their center of mass. So we're also going to talk about how I can move that pivot point and then have it rotate along that pivot point in a rather organized fashion. So let's go ahead and jump into that and talk about the principles at play there. So number one, let's organize ourselves. I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to just add a new solid in. This is really white on black. I kind of wanted to go for that inky graphic kind of a feel. So we'll achieve that a little bit later with a couple other means, but right now I put a white solid underneath of it. I'm going to lock it so it doesn't get in my way. You can see the lock switch down here on your timeline. So I'm going to lock it so it doesn't get in my way. And what that frees me up to do is it frees me up to work with these different guys individually, right? So right now I'm going to go ahead and name these, right? So let's go ahead and get organized. We're going to call this the hub. And then why don't we call this fin right, fin left. And I'm doing this by clicking on the name, pressing enter. What that does is that allows me to go in here and change the name of something. So we're going to call this fin top. Cool. All right. So we're organized, right? So I know what's what. I have names that are descriptive, and so far we're pretty well set up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make this hub disappear first off. First thing about organization that we're going to approach here involves the pivot points in the center of mass for these particular objects here. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to get pretty close to this guy. The interesting thing about this is that I want to have these guys rotate, and I want it to rotate and look like it's coming out from outside of this hub here. So I want to actually have it kind of swing like in this direction here. Let's take a look at what happens when we try to rotate it right now. When we rotate it right now, it doesn't do exactly what we wanted to do. Why is that? Because the center of mass is right here, and that's where the pivot point currently is. So we're actually going to need to move the pivot point to right here if we want to rotate it from that particular pivot point. So if you worked in 3D and certain 3D graphics programs, moving the pivot point and working with pivot points is something that should be fairly second nature to you at this point. But just for the sake of getting us used to the concept, we're going to actually transform this pivot point here. So let me make the hub disappear. And now what I want to do is I want to move this pivot point over to here, to this one corner. I can go ahead and I can use the anchor point by pressing A. I can manipulate where the anchor point is, but the problem here is that it moves my location. And this is a rather stinky situation, because then that means I have to actually move it back and make sure it lines up. And look at the damage that I've done by moving that pivot point there, right? Even if I get it exactly where I want it, I'm really in trouble here. So I got to move it back, which could create some inaccuracies in my original concept, right? So now it's on me to move it back to the right place. I could pull that off, really, but it's not something I really want to worry or fuss with. So let's undo all that and go back to where we were before. This is a really key and important tool here, and it's really it's a tool that's kind of a hidden Easter egg in After Effects. It's the pan behind anchor point tool. Easily enough, I can use this tool here with the 4 arrows. You'll be looking for it later because it's really valuable. And you can take it and you can move the anchor point while keeping your object in place. So simply enough, if I want it to rotate on there, I can just move the anchor point there with the anchor point behind tool. I can rotate it. See, now it's kind of rotating the way that I want it to. Interesting. So this is something, this is a little bit of kind of how the assembly, how I want the assembly to look. Like that. Fun. Alright, so let's reset that value so that we get it back to our original composition. So, easy enough, I can go through here, or rather easily enough, I can go through here, and I can go ahead and I can very quickly take these, and I can move them where they need to go. So, I'm going to get that fairly close there, and I'm going to get this fairly close here. See? No worry, no mess. Now, if I wanted to go in here, and if I wanted to go in here and I wanted to shift select all these, I'm going to press the R key to just reveal. I had to do it twice, but I pressed the R key to reveal the different motion, to reveal the different rotation manipulators. And here you go. I can go ahead and I can execute those all at the same time, just to kind of make sure I'm getting it right. So this is the motion that I want to go for, and I want this kind of this flingy cartoon kind of a thing to happen. So let's take a little bit, let's look a little bit further and explore how it is. So we've modeled already some complex motion around a particular anchor point by using the pan behind anchor point tool. So next up, we're going to work on we're going to animate these fins popping in and popping out, but we're also going to parent that to this center here. So our storyboard, our mini storyboard idea rather, is to really have these different fins fling out while this is as a whole, this whole object here is rotating. So if we wanted to do that, I guess we could kind of jitter these individually, and we could jitter this, and we can make sure that they all, we copy and paste the keyframes, we make sure they're all moving at the same time, but obviously we've gotten to the point where we understand that there's got to be an easier way to do it. That sounds really laborious, taking these keyframes and copying and pasting them between here, and then making sure that they're aligned and making sure that everything's in the same place to give the illusion that this is bouncing back and forth, right? So, the way that we do this is by parenting, or rather, sticking these fins underneath of this hub in terms of hierarchy is concerned. So basically when we talk about parenting, this is the parent and this is the child, right? We want this to be the parent, this is the object that we're going to move, and then this is going to be the child that moves along with it. It's really easy to do this in After Effects. So I can select the hub, and you'll see that it shows up down here, but underneath of our switches, so I can toggle switches and modes if I don't see it. Underneath of our switches, we have a pick whip for a parent, which is really, really helpful, right? So I can go ahead now and I can shift select all 3 of my fins, and I can either select from here, I can select hub, or a little bit funner is to use the pick whip, right? So I can use this pick whip here to select the hub. So either way works fine. And what we'll notice is now we've parented, now it's listing the hub as the parent for these items. So what we'll notice is that as I position this, now the fins follow it around. So I don't have to add an extra level of labor in here to make sure that this whole thing responds properly. And really, I mean, we can have some fun with this. We can scale it. We can do all different kinds of things with it. So, and you'll notice that these comply nicely with whatever's going on in the hub. So we'll have fun with this, and we'll do some jittery motion with this to make sure that we're getting the full effect here as these fins sort of pop right out of there. So what I'm going to do now is I want these fins to rotate, and the nice part is that they will, as this moves, they'll rotate relative to where they're at. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a position. This is the out position for them. So I'm going to give it about an 8-frame time frame for these to jump out, so they get this really fast, jerky sort of a motion, right? And then what I can do is I can select all 3 of these, Now that I've got my keyframe placement point now where I want to retract them, so to speak. All right, and it looks like about 90% kind of does the trick here, right? So, right? So they all are going at once, and really I want to manipulate them so they all go one at a time, right? So maybe it's like 1 per second, right? So it's, it goes thump, 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 kind of like it's, building up this anticipation or this energy here. So here it is. It goes thump, 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 and, I know that the sound effects make it extra dramatic here with my mouse sound effects here, so you can thank me later for that. So you'll see here, we've got these 3 fins coming out. Something that is bothering me somewhat from a visual perspective, and I know this is supposed to be somewhat sloppy, kind of got, I can kind of walk this forward and backwards a frame. Yeah, I kind of get this thing here. I need to shrink these down just a little bit because you can see that this is not really clearing that edge there. It's just one of those nitpicks that's just bothering me. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just scale it ever so slightly. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So I'm going to scale all of these about 95%, and then when they pop out, yeah, that looks a lot more natural. So it looks a little off-center, but you know what? That bothers me a lot less than those actually looking like they're coming out of geometry. It doesn't exist. So anyhow, here we go. We've got those. Remember that by selecting everything and pressing U, I can see the keyframes that are currently going. So I think that this is a nice little set of keyframes for opening up my guy here. And what I will do also is I'll select these individual keyframes. Since we want to give them that cartoon effect, we'll go here and we'll go ahead and we'll do an easy ease on them so that they will actually, they'll actually kind of roll in like that. So let's see what that looks like. And really, that's a little slow for me. So the nice part is, though, is that you can grab these keyframes and move them all at once, right? So I'm going to grab these, and I'm actually going to bring them in like 4 frames, right? Thump, thump, thump. There you go. So that's some fun stuff that we've got going on there with this in terms of making the fins pop out. Now remember that if I hold down P to see the position, whatever happens to the hub, these follow along with it. So that's going to be a key element to making the visual that we want. Okay, so now we're back. I did a little bit of cleanup and motion design and kind of just general all-around motion work on our central hub here. So I gave it some really, kind of sporadic positions and rotations and scales. As you can see here, my keyframes for my position, scale, and rotation are pretty crazy. And I kind of went through here a little haphazardly. I cut and pasted keyframes, and I did some other elements, some other aspects of this to make it, look really spastic, right? So I think what we have here is a pretty fun composition. I'll play it back for you, and we'll take a look. All right, so here it is. It's bouncing around. Something that was important that I wanted to emphasize here in terms of motion design was these fins popping out. I mean, it's all well and good that we made that happen, but it's really all for naught unless we can really draw attention to that action when it happens. So, we could bounce around this whole time and have the fins pop out when it's bouncing around, but I think by slowing things down, you'll see these gaps in my keyframes. By slowing things down just a little bit when those fins pop out, it gives a little bit more emphasis to that end point, to that end action, right? So you'll see, it gives a little bit more emphasis to that end action, and that's what we're after, and that's part of designing motion and animating, is just to make sure you don't cover up any part of your message that is particularly important or particularly fun. And I would even argue that we should take this and maybe give us a little bit more time to see that fin there. So I could probably tweak this forever, as most of you being designers and artists and stuff can understand the wanting to tweak your work constantly and consistently. So here it is. Yeah, so that's kind of cool. In the end here, we bring the brand in, and we bring this particular thing in, and I think it'd be interesting. I'd like to put a message on here. I mean, it can be anything really, but here we go. We're bouncing around. We'll watch it one more time, and then boom. I kind of like for there to be a message on there. in the end. So what we'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll extend this a little bit, because if I'm going to put something on there like words or anything, it's going to be a little hard to read it. And notice how at the end here I kind of taper off and I add a little bit of motion here at the end where I'm slowly positioning and expanding it, so that it just has that, it just stays, it just stays dynamic, it stays moving. And really I would argue it moves a little bit too much for the end. And really when we take this, we can go in here into the graph editor, and the nice part is when something kind of just tapers off ever so slightly like that with motion, we want to go ahead and ease it. Easing is really important there. Whoops, that was something else I was working on. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that here in just a minute. So here we go. Now, to finalize, what if I went through all this trouble and I made this really cool thing here, and then but I wanted to add something else to it at the end, like say I wanted to add a word on here. I would say I want to add a word onto my hub here. Well, it's pretty simple to do that. Even after we've animated, we can still go ahead and we can parent something. So let's see here. Let's say gotcha, right? Maybe say I want to put that on there. Maybe that's my brand name, which has probably already been taken and used quite extensively. It's probably somebody's brand name. So I'm not trying to rip your copyright off here. I'm just trying to teach a class. So here we go. Maybe it says gotcha right here for fun. There we are. All right. So the nice part about this is, well, the problem here is that if I go forward a frame, look, it's not moving with my object. But interestingly enough, if I can line it up on one frame, I can parent it back to the hub, right? So I took the gotcha layer here and I used the pick whip to parent it back to that frame. So see, look, now it's going. And maybe I want to go ahead and kind of cut this off here. I want to snip the timing off here, so boom, gotcha. So also there's some things in here that require due diligence. So we've got some motion blur, right? So we want to switch the motion blur switch on our objects, and we also want to continuously rasterize them. So there we go. How fun is that? So you may be asking yourself, whoops, hang on, I forgot to do the motion blur switch for that. There we go. So now it looks a little bit more cartoony, right? So we can kind of get this this fun idea here as it queues up. So some of you might be thinking, okay, well, this is just a black on white composition. Some of you may be after that. But for bonus points here, in the next segment, I'm actually going to show you how you can spice this up a little bit with some rasters and some other things here. So I'm going to run through some quick tips here at the end for bonus material to show you kind of how you can take this and do something a little more interesting with it than just a black on white composition, which can be fun in and of itself, but maybe we want to do something a little different with it. So for a bonus here at the end, I'm going to just show you what you could do with something as a simple black and white composition. Maybe make it fun, maybe add a little bit extra things to it, get you thinking about a couple of different things, especially when it comes to layering and how to work in After Effects. So I've got this one design here, and we've watched already, about a skillion times, right? So you guys understand, boom, gotcha, right? You guys are used to looking at that. One thing that we can do now is we can take this as a whole composition, and we can add it into another composition, but one that has different layers inside of it. So since it's a black on white design, I can grab it here, and what I can do now is secret tip here is to grab this and drag it onto the new composition icon here. And what that does now is that actually takes that composition, packages it up, and sticks it inside of a new composition. So this is a little bit of a way that we can pre-compose. It's different than pre-composing technically, but it gives us this as one piece that we can manipulate inside of a larger composition now. So what can we do with this? Well, why don't we go ahead? I've got a piece of I went online, I downloaded a piece of graph paper for free, royalty-free graph paper, right? And I'm clicking and dragging it underneath it here, and maybe I want to get it to like cover the screen, right? Maybe this is what happens in study hall or something. Gotcha is a game we play in study hall. I have no idea. But anyhow, this is what we've got here. Gotcha. And then the nice part is I can use a blend mode to multiply it. And multiplying takes all the white and drops it out and just adds the black on top, which is a quick method to do it. You could do it a couple other different ways. You could use this as a track mat, right? We talked about track mats. So this is about kind of taking and combining your knowledge together. So I've got the same layer on top of itself, but I can luma mat it. Right? I can loom mat it backwards, right? So I can get that same effect, right? And it looks a little bit different. I prefer it to be multiplied, but you can add it any other, you can add it in there any way that you like. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply it in there. And it's interesting because it's black, right? And it's got that inky, well, not terribly inky look, but it looks inkier than, some of the other compositions that we've looked at. So now that I've got my spiky ball here, it's interesting because I can go here and I can tint. I can go ahead and I can tint this guy to make him match up with the graph paper, almost like he's drawn on the graph paper, right? So I want to map my black to, let's try to pull a color from here. All right, so it's not going to work entirely at first, and then the sad part is that you're really going to lose. You're going to have the dueling lines here, and you're not going to be able to see it. But what we can do now is we can selectively take this and make it a little bit more saturated. We can darken it a little bit more, right? So we could give it a quality that makes it stick out a little bit more. So it takes a little bit of finesse, takes a little bit of work, but you can go ahead and you can tweak this this tinting, and you can make it really stand out. Also, another thing that we may want to do, I kind of like it that way, right? Wink. We can go ahead and we can add another white solid underneath of this, and I'll show you where that comes into play here. So I'm going to add a white solid down here at the bottom, and now I can fade the graph paper off ever so slightly because these lines are still fighting with my main purpose. My main reason here is really to look at the gotcha doodad. And there you go. We kind of get now it sticks out on its own. Sometimes it actually strategically gets lost back here in the graph paper, which I think is a fun little side effect of what we're doing. And it's got this neat little complex graph paper background. Something else that's a little trick that we like to employ sometimes, if you can do it ever so subtly, is to apply vignetting. So let's go ahead and I'm going to put another solid on top. Let's go ahead and try actually to make it. We can, usually if you vignette something, you vignette it with black, but let's go ahead and try making this like a dark blue, just to be a little atypical. So I've got this mat on top of here. What a vignette does, I'm going to go ahead and grab the ellipse tool to draw a mask now. What vignetting really does is it gives you a very subtle visual cue of where, and that's Control T to transform that mask, right? So it gives you a very, very subtle visual cue of what to look at. And really I'm blocking it out right now, so not so subtle, right? But if I go down here to my mask, I can subtract that out. Still, not very subtle. But for my mask options, we talked about feathering masks. I can go in here and I can feather my mask out, right? And I can expand my mask, right? So what I can end up doing is I can end up creating this kind of this visual draw to the middle. And that's pretty subtle, right? Furthermore, I can go in here and I can multiply it and darken it up. And it's interesting because now I've created a little bit of depth, and I've maybe subtly forced you to focus on this. If you just jumped in here and you started looking at this, you probably wouldn't suspect that I'm trying to game you into looking at this. So that's a nice part about this, and it looks like it gives it a little bit of dimension, like we're shining a light on it. So that's another great side effect of putting a vignette around something. So if you ever want to focus people, then a vignette's a good way to do that. Another thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a small S-curve over top of this, right? Never hurts to try it. So I'm sorry, I didn't want to pull down a solid, but I did want to pull down an adjustment layer. Adjustment layers are the same as they are in Photoshop. You can put an effect on an adjustment layer and have it flow down to all of the other layers underneath of it, which is handy dandy. So let me put a curve on this, an S-curve, and I'm going to brighten it up. That's kind of fun. So kind of adds a little bit of extra visual emphasis to it. So there we go. And we end up with something fun. Gotcha. So that's just a couple of tips you can use to make something, spice something up a little bit, add some rasters into it, and a vignette and some S-curves. And these are typical tricks that I pull down to make something look pretty interesting.